Hello and welcome to No Holds Barred with Andre Walker. Coming up on today's show, we're going to be talking free trade with Alex Deane. YouTube star Mahyar Tousi will be telling us all about the dangers posed by allowing pro-European phony fact-checkers to attack the Conservative Party. And of course, we'll be awarding the Order of Lenin to the Loony Lefty of the Week. And trust me, this one is a corker. But first, this week's talking point is all about free trade. We all know the biggest advantage of Brexit is that it gives us the opportunity to trade right across the world rather than be shackled to the economic corpse of Europe. EU tariffs and quotas are immoral because they push up prices for working class families in Britain, whilst also entrenching poverty in the developing world because Africans can't sell their stuff in Britain. Every year, thousands die because of this. And to subsidise inefficient yet wealthy French farmers, it is a scandal. No sensible Briton would support this situation willingly. That's why the pro-Europeans lie about it. And their latest lie is that free trade will lead to the abolition of the National Health Service. When you say it out loud, it sounds totally absurd, because it is. All America has asked is that when we decide to put NHS cleaning contracts out to private tender, they have the right to bid on them as well. We already give this right to EU companies, and it's actually improved the NHS. But these companies can only bid on contracts we choose to advertise. Everything else stays in the public sector. Jeremy Corbyn is lying about the NHS to get votes, and he thinks that you are too stupid to realise. I have got more faith in the integrity and intellect of the British nation. That is this week's talking point, and joining me to discuss it is political strategist Alex Deane. Alex, free trade is the biggest advantage of Brexit, and the NHS isn't going to die as a result, is it?
Well, thanks for having me, and congratulations on the show. I definitely believe that free trade is the single most significant economic advantage about Brexit. I've got a lot of concerns about sovereignty and our ability to govern ourselves, and that was my first real governing principle in campaigning for Brexit. But you're right, in economic terms, in my view, our ability to negotiate trade deals around the world is by miles the most significant aspect of our departure from the EU. There are people who wanted to prioritise our ability to control immigration, and they were part of the coalition that campaigned to leave the EU, but that really wasn't what motivated me. For me, it was free trade, and it remains free trade. Look at it like this. Britain, when we became a member of the EU, significantly diminished our ability to trade around the world. If you're an EU accession member from the East, used to the jackboot of the Soviets, and then you have had the time after the fall of the Soviet Union scrabbling for your place in the world, no wonder membership of the EU looks like an expansion of your horizon. It is a significant expansion of your markets. But for the UK, a global trading nation, accustomed to trading around the world, we actually shut down our ability to trade with countries with whom we have very long trading links when we joined and when we've chosen to remain in. So for me, our ability to trade is the vital point. But I'll go one more. Everyone thinks it's about goods, as you were talking about in your introduction. But actually, it's not just goods. Britain is the world's leading provider of services. And here in London, we're the world's best hub of services. Not only do I note that the EU has failed always to complete the single market in services, so actually free trade in services in the EU isn't yet complete, but they've yet to put services in any free trade agreement with anyone around the world when the EU does a trade deal. Let's imagine we'd voted to stay in the EU. Do you think then the EU would have said, well, now the Brits have decided to remain, now for the first time we'll prioritise what the Brits are best at? I don't. I think we're only going to prioritise services and free trade in services if we can control our own trade deals, and that's what we get by leaving the EU.
There was some discussion, and I should say that you advised some of the most important corporations in the world on how to deal with governments and how to deal with regulation. But there was significant concern that if we weren't at the top table in Brussels, then we might be pushed around by the EU in terms of access to markets and regulation. Is that a concern you share?
No, not one bit. I mean, we are a world's top 5 significant nation in military power, in soft power and diplomacy, and certainly in economic activity. We're going to be an outsized third-party nation, just outside the European Union, trading closely with them. It would be crazy for the EU to seek not to involve our voice. And you will note that even in the hardest times of our discussions with the EU, and I concede, of course, it hasn't all been plain sailing since we voted to leave, but in the hardest times, the EU still wanted to ensure that they had access to the City of London, to finance done through the city, and to what you can find in debt. Because what we're talking about in most of the Euro nations now are debt-fueled economies and debt-riven environments in which they desperately need access to that kind of debt. That may sound like it's manipulating them somehow or pushing them. It's not. It's simply pointing out the fact that they need to have continued access to the City of London, and it's a significant aspect of our control or ability to control our economy, but also to influence economies outside the UK.
In my introduction, I talked about the link between Brexit and the NHS. In truth, I do not believe there is a link between Brexit and the NHS. And yet suddenly, throughout this debate, which should be about free trade, about sovereignty, about cutting food prices for British people, and of course buying that produce from developing nations, the NHS has become so involved in this. Why has that happened?
There is a link that we should be aware of, which is about people on low pay working in the NHS who we might not have access to if we had stringent immigration controls in the UK. It's one of the reasons I don't want us to become a more rigid country on immigration terms. I want us to have a more liberal migration approach. But putting that to one side, all the discussions about trade and Brexit, it has nothing to do with the NHS. It's absolutely extraordinary to try to manipulate the NHS and make it a talking point in Brexit. I actually think it's just the same as the left has always said, 48 hours to save the NHS, 24 hours to save the NHS before every single election we've had. Lo and behold, Tories win, NHS is still there and thriving 5 years later. So it's just a knee-jerk response from the left.
Does this prove they're losing the argument?
Well, no, because it still works. It's a dog whistle that works to their audience. And in modern elections aren't like this. They're not actually combat between two sides going at each other. Modern elections are tram lines where the two parties stick to their own positions and seek to draw out their own electorates. That's what Corbyn and co are doing when they're talking about the NHS. They're not actually seeking to engage meaningfully in the battle of ideas. They're seeking to motivate their supporters to come out. And if you look at it from that perspective, it actually works, even though it's not true. And it's repeatedly demonstrated that it's false after the election and the NHS is still there. One more point. GPs are private practitioners. GPs are in the private sector. And GPs are amongst the most trusted people in our whole country. Poll after poll show that your general practitioner are amongst the people you respect the most and trust the most. And yet, on Corbyn's logic about nationalisation and not allowing privatisation into the NHS, he wouldn't have GPs as they are. He'd have to nationalise them.
Well, of course, the other point to make is when they talk about privatisation and we should have people rather than profit, Nuffield and Bupa, the two other big providers, neither of those are for-profit companies. So actually the stupidity related to this. But here's my concern. Look, you've advised the Conservative Party, you worked for David Cameron.
In opposition.
In opposition. What would be your advice to the Conservatives now? Because they need to take on those northern seats. Obviously, the Brexit Party has been significantly helpful in the 317 seats. And I think I said in the show previously that Nigel Farage deserves credit for that. But obviously, these things like the NHS are going to be a big scare to many voters that are considering voting Conservative for the first time. If you were in CCHQ, if you were the Conservative Party chairman, what would you be doing now to lock up those votes?
I think the Conservative Party is doing the right thing. Matt Hancock is a credible spokesman for the health sector and is talking constantly about the importance of the NHS and the Conservative Party's commitment to it. There are some people who are simply never going to believe you. There are some people who are always going to be the antis, and you mustn't let those people steal too much of your time in a campaign where you're trying to drive out your vote. But you do have to assuage concerns and to demonstrate to people that listen to that Labour line and think, is that true, that it's not. And that basically seems to me is Matt Hancock's full-time job, is debunking lies and myths about the NHS and saying how much the Conservative Party is committed to it. So I think they're doing the right thing.
Do you think that a lot of this stuff, when you talk about, the Tories are secretly going to abolish the NHS, and once again, I mentioned the Brexit Party, they've said this of Nigel Farage, his secret plan to abolish the NHS as well. Do you think that contributes to hatred in politics? Because it seems to me that these students wouldn't be throwing eggs at people if they didn't believe the NHS was secretly up for sale.
Yeah, I think we've got the tone wrong in politics, and I think a lot of that does come from the kind of rhetoric you're describing. But actually, I think Brexit has had a strange effect on polarising our country now too. And I say that as someone who's a fervent Brexiteer. I think it's a subject on which reasonable people can reasonably disagree. The sadness for me is that there's no loser's acceptance. There's no loser's legitimacy now. People won't accept that we voted to leave the EU because they just think it's so wrong, or they think they are so much smarter than the rest of us that they want to override the will of the majority of people who voted in our country. And that, of course, does lead to anger. So there's anger on both sides of politics, and we shouldn't dismiss that. The difference for me is that there's legitimacy in the anger of those people who voted in 2016, voted to leave the EU, and have seen their will systematically opposed by a coterie of former prime ministers, wealthy city business people who prefer the status quo, and celebrities who think because they are so important, I think they know so much better than the rest of us, that they can demand a so-called people's vote and try and change what happened and try and get their way anyway, whilst still pretending to believe in democracy, which plainly they don't.
Alex Deane, thank you. Well, there it is. Alex Deane, former political strategist, and now a brand new segment, Whopper of the Week. And this week, we are giving the prize to Putney Liberal Democrat candidate Sue Wixley for claiming she won the Nobel Peace Prize. Miss Wixley has distributed leaflets saying, and I quote, that she led the campaign to ban landmines in South Africa, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, unquote. Somebody needed to tell the Nobel Prize Committee that, because they don't seem to recall this happening at all. Now, they did dish out the award for the international campaign against landmines and its boss, Jody Williams. But as the name might suggest, Jody Williams is an entirely different person. So congratulations, Sue, for winning Whopper of the Week. Your prize is not one, but 2 gift cards for Pizza Express Woking. We're going to send them over. Enjoy. Now, we all know the most dishonest people on social media are the so-called fact checkers. There's nothing more dishonest than lying about your background, motivation, and who funds you. Fact checkers do all those things. Almost all of them are pro-European activists and representatives of the anti-democratic establishment. They attack people on Twitter who dare to disagree with their paymasters. But this week, they hit an all-time low by claiming the Conservatives had no right to fact-check Jeremy Corbyn during a debate. And even Twitter threatened to ban the Conservatives if they dared to run a fact-check rebuttal against Corbyn ever again. These fact-checkers do not want patriots gate-crashing their own left-wing loving. And here, to help answer what we should do about these guys, is the YouTube star Mahyar Tousi. Mahyar, how worried should we be about this Twitterati?
Oh, it's absolutely mental, because they've created a shrine of a concept, an industry that shouldn't exist, never existed before. And the fact-checking issue is that, as you said, is primarily organised by people who are already biased. For example, we were talking about Sue Wixley earlier, we were talking about the NHS being privatised or sold off to Donald Trump. Have you seen any of these fact-checkers mentioning that? Have you seen any of these fact-checkers saying, oh, actually, Donald Trump can't buy the NHS? And that's the issue that we have with it. And there's no problem with, so to clarify, what the Conservative Party did was a bit silly, it was unnecessary, but it was a bit of fun. They only did it throughout the actual debate, it was temporary, it was just fun. And I don't think any voter changed their mind by just looking at that Twitter account. Twitter is not the real life. And they were like, oh, well, you misled the people. And it's basically like the Vote Leave bus, £350 million all over again, and the election is now rigged. It's not the case.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? That's the point that you make. I don't have a problem with a fact checker setting up as a fact checker. That's what the Conservatives did, and that's what these lefties do. But the problem is, they absolutely refuse to be unbiased, and they force us to shut up.
Well, no, the issue is they think that fact checking has to be some sort of special humans that are completely impartial in their personal life, in their professional life, in their political life, and they're basically like the priests of their politics, whereas facts are facts. Anyone, as long as you're representing the fact, anyone could say it. Even Jeremy Corbyn could have some facts, and so this is a fact. And whereas they say political parties or someone who is already biased can't represent the fact. I have a YouTube channel, and the best way that I think we could move on when it comes to media and information is that instead of having organizations saying like Channel 4, we are impartial and we do fact checking, all organization media should be clear that we're left-leaning, we're right-leaning, like the papers, and say what we're saying, this is our opinion. Oh, by the way, what we're saying in this bit is our fact. So every time I make a video, I say, this is a fact, this is my source, but by the way, my opinion on this is this. Always clarify, and people could watch the left and the right, up, down, and then they could form their own opinion. That's the best way.
But that is the problem, isn't it? It's this attempt to pretend to be neutral. Now, what you do is you say you're neutral in the sense that you are a conservative-minded person and you're going to express your view in that way. You're going to be fair-minded about it, but you're not going to pretend to be Labour or Liberal Democrat or whatever. What amazes me when you look at Channel 4, when you look at the BBC, when you look at the fact-checkers online, and now increasingly when you look at Sky News, actually, these guys are coming at it with an agenda, just like you, but they're pretending they don't.
No, absolutely. Sky, for the record, are getting absolutely ridiculous these days, which is interesting. No one expected that. But during the 2016 referendum debate, there was a debate organised by the BBC, and I went to the broadcasting house and I overheard a conversation of the staffers and the producers who were literally having, I mean, obviously I didn't record it, I have the evidence, but they were having a conversation about, okay, so this is how we form the questions for the Remainers and the Brexiteers. I'm like, well, you guys are supposed to be impartial. And so the problem with the BBC or these organizations are not necessarily the presenters themselves, it's the people in the background. They're the ones that are shifting the actual agenda, and that's the problem.
See, I think the point that you made is absolutely right. It doesn't matter if somebody is biased. It doesn't matter if somebody comes in with an agenda. Nobody is accusing the BBC of lying. Nobody's accusing Channel 4 of lying. The problem is that they come in with a bent, if you like, and they don't admit what that is. If I pick up the Daily Mirror, I know that it's supportive of the Labour Party. If I pick up the Sun, I know it's likely to be supportive of the Conservatives. But actually, if I turn on my TV, that is just denied, isn't it?
No, it's because no one fact checks the fact checkers, and someone should. If we're going to have fact checkers, someone also has to fact check them, because they say that, as I said earlier, they want to create a church where if the fact checker says something, you have to believe it anyway. Whereas, for example, if the Conservative Party or Labour Party present a fact on an issue, you should be like, oh, okay, that's a fact. We're going to do our research, but fair enough. It's just let people say what they want. And this is, again, an attack on free speech in a different way.
But I'll tell you the other thing that worries me, just to broaden this into a wider issue. We keep hearing politicians say, this is too important to be political. We've got to put this out to experts. Now, actually, experts have an opinion, and that's based on certain assumptions. And I worry that time and time again, whether it be Ofcom, whether it be the Electoral Commission, whether it be, any one of these quangos, the BBC Trust, whoever it is, actually, every time you cede power to one of these groups of experts, actually it means there's no longer any democratic control, and we become a less democratic country as a result.
Now, I'll give you an example. It's a weird one, but for anyone who's watched The Thick of It, the TV show, there was an episode where the minister said, I found an expert who said this about our policy, it's not good, and then the advisor said, well, go find the right expert. And you could find your own expert. Basically, that's what they do. Whether politicians or business or any organization or media, they automatically, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously, they go find the expert that agrees with them. That's what the Remainers did. They always found the experts, the so-called expert that said in leaving the EU, basically we're all going to die. And that's the issue. I could bring you a different expert. It's the same with climate change. You could find experts who say it's real, it's not real, it's man-made, it's not man-made. And so the best way, as I said, is to encourage people to look at all sides and left, right, and then form your own opinion. Do your own research, form your own opinion. Don't create an untouchable church and saying these people, you have to believe what they say. Everybody else, don't believe any fact, because that's not a fact.
So look, people have been pretty stunned by the success of the Mahyar Tousi YouTube channel. What's next for you?
I think, so I was kind of worried because when Boris said we're going to get Brexit done at the end of October, because I said, what am I going to talk about after Brexit?
Don't worry. I think there'll be a few years of arguments before that happens.
So special thanks to Oliver Letwin for ruining Brexit for everyone. And we have this election now. So I think what I'm going to be doing, I found my niche, which is After Theresa May failing to deliver Brexit, a lot of people moved from the mainstream media to YouTube and social media in general, and they want to, not that they completely distrust the mainstream media and they fully trust a random person on YouTube, but it's just a new perspective. So I can continue this everyday news and obviously domestic politics, and especially now I'm talking about what's happening in Iran because no one's talking about it in the mainstream media. There's a media blackout. Obviously what happens next year in the American elections, we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I'll try my best to basically have my opinion, but say I'm trying to bring you the truth of my job is to expose the other side. I'm not going to defend my own side fully because that's ridiculous, because I can sometimes criticise the Tories as well. So.
Absolutely. So Mahyar Tousi, thank you so much. That's Mahyar Tousi, the YouTube star, and now the Order of Lenin that we award for the Loony Leftist of the Week. And this week, it goes to Liberal Democrat leader Jo Swinson. Not done with being Britain's most mumsy politician, mutton dressed as mutton, she's launched the most left-wing manifesto in her party's entire history. She wants to splurge $50 billion on things like welfare increases, loony green initiatives, and hiring thousands of new bureaucrats. That's going to put up tax by 1% on you. And in classic loony lefty fashion, she doesn't like democracy much either. She wants to overturn Brexit without even bothering to rig a second referendum. You know, the Liberal Party waited 200 years for a popular uprising and then backed the Goldman Sachs position. Loony. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks to my guests, Alex Deane and Mahyar Tousi. Remember to hit the subscribe button and the bell on YouTube to keep up with all of our programmes, and you can nominate anyone for the Order of Lenin or Whopper of the Week. Just put their name and an explanation in the comment section below. Until next time, goodbye.